Hi, I'm Gemma Briggs and I'm the publishing executive at Mainly Publishing. I work on the language, literature and culture books and journals. And I'm at the University of Leeds to talk to Alan O'Leary, who's the editor of the Italianist film issue. So Alan, if you could tell us how the film issue came about.
Well, the Italianist is a journal that's now 30 years old, but we've just done 3 film issues. So the first of the annual film issues was in 2009, and it comes really from a sense that the discipline was ready for a dedicated film issue, a dedicated issue of a respected academic journal that dealt solely with questions of audio-visualness. So we do TV, we do film and so on. Really the discipline was ready, but we're getting more and more submissions to the journal itself that were concerned with cinema or TV. Mainly cinema, it has to be said still. And we thought we needed a dedicated space. There was also a sense that there's a lot of teaching now done on cinema and a lot of research done on it, and it was time for the discipline to take stock. People started working on Italian cinema way back in the 1970s. The standard works have been around for quite some time now, so we felt that it was time to actually give a space where we could look back over the discipline, see what the themes were, see also what the problems were with it, and maybe in a sense get rid of some of the residual dilettantism that was still in the discipline, where perhaps you still had a lot of people around who had, read the book and therefore thought they could talk about the film, the adaptation in other words. So we wanted to bring, I think, a real sense that if this part of the discipline now had a dedicated space, we had to be theoretically well informed, we had to be historically well informed, and we had to be reflexive in our scholarship. So that was the motivation behind it, really. I should mention a special issue of another Mainly journal, Italian Studies. We did myself and Catherine O'Raw from Bristol, who's on the editorial board of the Italianist also, of the film issue. We did a special issue of Italian Studies called Thinking Italian Film, which was precisely about taking stock of the discipline, of the problems with it, of the potentials in it, and this led really to my thinking on the film issue as well. So we were fortunate to be able to persuade Millicent Marcus from Yale University, who is one of the leading scholars of Italian cinema, to be involved as the editor, co-editor with myself for the first 3 years. She stepped down from it now, but for the first 3 years she was working on this as well. So we had an American end and another outpost on this side of the pond. And we recruited several people also for the advisory board from Italy. Mm-hmm. So the notion is that we can get people working in Italian, and we publish material in Italian as well as English. People writing in Italian, people working from the States, and people working from this particular island, as well even as more recently we've had people from Australia contribute. So trying to give a global really forum for the discussion and for scholarship on Italian cinema. So that was the motivation.
Would you say that film studies is more popular in the UK or America? Or?
I couldn't answer that question really. I think it's taught a lot in a lot of places. I think it's not necessarily always taken seriously at a research level. And partly I have to say that's the fault of the discipline itself, because it hasn't always been terribly serious at a research level. I think students are very interested in it, so there increasingly are courses devoted to Italian cinema. There are increasingly being published companions to Italian cinema, but really we get as many contributions at the moment from the States and North America in general as we do from Ireland and Britain, and indeed a few from Italy. We'd like to increase that, and also from, as I say, the Southern Hemisphere also. So I don't know. I'm not sure of the answer. Is there more film studies being done in the States or in Britain? I mean, perhaps it's a larger space, so that from that point of view, yeah. But we get as many contributions from the different places as we want.
Could you just tell us what was in the first issue of the film issue?
Well, what we decided to do was to follow the format that the Italianist uses anyway, which is to have a dedicated space for research articles, so standard scholarly research articles, but also to add perhaps what you might call less conventional sections. The Italianist, for example, has always had a section called Writer's Desktop, which featured interviews with writers or accounts of recent literature and so on in Italian writing. But so what we've done is we have a section called Editing Suite, which is the equivalent, but deals with cinema issues. We also have a section called Mise en Scène, where we deal with questions that are key to the discipline. So, for example, in the first of the three so far, the three annual film issues, we have an article by the scholar from Birkbeck, Mary Wood, on interviews, how you use interviews as a tool of research and of scholarship. And we hadn't seen a lot in the discipline of film about how interviews can be a tool, but are obviously a very problematic one. And Mary did a nice theoretical piece precisely on this, a kind of a think piece about it. We also have a section we call Cinegiornale, so a kind of a news section, which I've used to get people to tell us what has been happening in conferences or large-scale projects that have been done in Italian cinema. So the notion is that this will be a forum not simply for the research that's been done, but also a notice board, let's say, for the research that's been done around, and the kind of questions that are being raised in conferences and so on. So really, the sense that we have our finger on the pulse of the discipline somehow, and that people will come to the Italianist film issue to find out what's going on, what people are talking about. And so, for example, the last couple of issues, I've had reports of the AAIS, which is the large American conference of Italian studies, the American Association of Italian Studies, huge conference, and there are many, many film panels at this, but they've never really had a dedicated report. So I've got, very kindly, a couple of graduate students from the States have written reports about the film panels and papers at the AAIS, which I think will be really useful actually for historians of the discipline in years to come. They'll look back and see what people were actually concerned with, what they were talking about in these years. What else have we had? Well, the themes that we've been dealing with have been, I guess, traditional enough ones sometimes, like the question of realism in Italian cinema. This has not really gone away. It's always been a central theme in Italian cinema. We've had a whole bunch of articles from one issue to the next on the theme of migration, which is intriguing because one of the things about Italian cinema studies is that it's always been obsessed with the extent to which Italian cinema is somehow reflective of the Italian nation. I think this is a very problematic concept myself, but there's a notion that somehow you have a national cinema that is the mirror of the Italian nation. What these articles on migration do is deal with how actually new migrants into Italy put into question what Italy means, and it's the supposed homogenous culture that Italy never actually had, but people pretended it had. And this also then puts into question the extent to which cinema might be reflective of a culture that pre-exists it, or might be constituting that culture, or the different cultures that actually come up to make the modern or contemporary nation. So I think these series of articles have actually been quite important, and for that reason I've tended to put them first in the journal each year, including probably this this issue coming up, the 2012 issue, will have another on precisely this theme. We've had, I think, some of the best articles we've had so far have been very close analysis of film. So, if you like, very traditional film analysis, but a kind of analysis that has been not always done in Italian film studies. For example, Catherine O'Raw's article in the first issue on the film Romanzo Criminale, in which she deals with a section of the film that's not more than 3 minutes long. And it's an exceptional article. I think it's practically our most downloaded one, because it pays intense attention to a montage sequence, uses the kind of theoretical materials that have been written about montage in film studies and applies it to this extremely interesting historical genre film. So it's a kind of gangster movie.
Am I right in saying that you've met the director? Did he come over to the Leeds Festival?
We didn't meet the director, we met the screenwriter.
Oh, screenwriter, sorry.
The director is a famous actor called Michele Placido. But the writer is a famous judge, actually, called Giancarlo De Cataldo, who's also a thriller writer, and he wrote the book that Romanzo Criminale is based on, and then collaborated on the screenplay, and has subsequently collaborated on the screenplay of a 2-series TV adaptation of his book, which apparently is very good. I haven't seen it. So we actually published a conversation with Giancarlo De Cataldo in the first issue, so we were quite happy to get access to him. He's obviously an extremely intelligent man, so I think he has some interesting things to say. So one of the things we've tried to do with the journal is offer a space for reflection on the history of the discipline. So I was very pleased, first of all, of course, to have Millicent Marcus on board, but also last year in the 2011 issue, we got 4 of the most eminent scholars of Italian cinema, Geoffrey Noel Smith, Peter Bondanella, Marcia Landi and Richard Dyer, to do testimonial pieces about their own relationship to the discipline, what they considered important in their own studies, and what they thought were the potentials and problems for Italian cinemas today. So I hope to continue this theme, actually. I hope to get some great Italian scholars of Italian cinema to, perhaps using interviews, someone like Gian Piero Brunetta, who, if you study Italian cinema, you know who he is. He is the major figure. He's done these massively important and also simply massive books on Italian cinema. And it would be quite a coup, I think, if we can get him to do a reflective piece, whether an interview or a testimonial piece. And people like Francesco Casetti, who used to be in Milan and now is at Yale. We had 2 younger scholars, Lucia Cardone and Maria Grazia Fanchi, who work on gender in the Italian context, which is quite unusual, so in Italy itself. And they gave us a piece where they sum up the kind of work that's been done in gender in Italian cinema studies in Italy itself, including their own work. And both of those are on the editorial board, so we're really happy to have them involved. So that's one of the big themes. Perhaps another, I mentioned that realism was a big theme still in Italian cinema studies more broadly, kind of looking back to neorealism and so on as a central moment of Italian cinema. We had an interesting discussion, which we kept as a discussion in the mise en scène section of 2010, where Millicent Marcus wrote an article on Il Divo, which is a very important recent film from Italy by Paolo Sorrentino, a very talented director, on the Italian political figure Giulio Andreotti. This film is critically celebrated but also very controversial. And what Millicent Marcus does is she talks about the extent to which this film, stylistically innovative, referencing other genres and so on, can also be considered in relation to Italy's tradition of realism. Now, other people are less persuaded of this, so we had responses from Pier Paolo Antonello from Cambridge, Alex Marlowe Mann, who works at St Andrews, in which they deal and, if you like, deconstruct with this notion of realism and post-realism that Millicent Marcus invokes, and Millicent Marcus then responds to these. And this again seems to be a piece or a batch of pieces that readers are most interested in.
And what's coming up in the 2012 issue?
Well, as I say, another article on the whole question of migration in Italian cinema, a piece on the important director Carlo Lizzani, who's still alive but is very old now, but whose career goes right back to the late 1940s. We have a very interesting piece on Gina Lollobrigida by Pauline Small from Queen Mary, in which she takes this archival approach to the study of stardom and the construction of a star's career. So I think that's quite an important piece there, and I'm glad we have that. There's a piece I'm very excited about by Daniel Hipkins from Exeter, in which she talks about this, the figure of the TV showgirl, the so-called velina in Italian culture, and how the velina is made a kind of a scapegoat for certain things in Italian culture. But it also, this figure is also referred to in popular Italian cinema a lot. For example, in the work that I'm doing myself on the Cinepanettone, which is the Italian Christmas film. And I should mention that there will be an interview, a kind of a roundtable interview, or a series of snippets of different interviews about the Cinepanettone, curated by myself in the editing suite section of 2012. Several more research articles, a report on the American Association of Italian Studies conference from last year, the film panels there, and more broadly, something I should mention, we have two very interesting pieces about the process of producing DVD commentaries. So, as I mentioned, in our mise-en-scène section, we're trying to be a bit more reflexive about things that are used in the discipline, like interviews, for example, that Mary Wood has written about, but that people haven't really kind of considered how they might, what the problems as well as the potentials of them might be. So DVD commentaries are constantly used in teaching, certainly, but how do you produce one? What are the challenges of doing it? So Robert Gordon and Millicent Marcus have talked about doing commentaries for Bicycle Thieves, La di Biciclette. Millicent Marcus did one on Cinema Paradiso, and Robert did another on Teorema, the Pasolini film. So they talk about the challenges involved in doing these commentaries. In the future, what I'm going to try to do is perhaps to get more material from Italians. I want to access what is to some extent a kind of undiscovered hinterland of Italian cinema scholarship that's been done in places like Bologna, like Roma 3 in Rome. And just material in Italian, I think that could, because we have this virtue, I think, of publishing in Italian in the Italianist, we can really engage scholars working on similar material to us, but in this different academic environment. So I'm going to really push getting more material from those. We're perhaps going to try to move away a bit from accounts of individual films. This has been a traditional way of writing about film. You know, you do, let's say, a close analysis of a given film, a kind of close reading, and these can be very interesting if the film itself is important, or if the methodology employed is itself very intriguing, and that's the case, for example, with Catherine O'Raw's article on Romanza Criminale. Such articles aren't always so interesting, however, because often the films themselves might be perhaps not scintillating in terms of their relevance to the discipline, or they don't necessarily change how we see Italian cinema by and large. It can be sometimes much more interesting to, let's say, take a whole genre, take a batch of films and study those. So this is the way we're trying to move, without necessarily getting rid completely of the studies of individual films, but perhaps asking if that's always the best way to study cinema.